Hey guys, Megan here. Thank you for joining me today. So this project's going to be a bit like jazz. It's going to go off into a couple of different avenues that, the end result was not the one that I had in mind, but that's okay. Now, I want to show you these molds that I used, and these are ornament molds you can get off of AliExpress, but I do want to warn you that they are not easy molds to use. They have a lot of little crevices and points where air pockets can easily get into, so they are very difficult to work with. I just want to give you that as a heads up that if you want to use these molds, I would recommend going slowly and taking the time to push out as much air as possible. You can see I'm using this sort of stick that has a pointed end and a round end to kind of massage out the air pockets at the very ends of this. I will also say that one of the things that is most difficult about these is getting the resin snowflakes out of the molds because they're very sharp, pointy, and it really requires a lot of just bullheaded strength, I guess, and you'll see that later on as I'm going through this. So originally my plan was to make a much larger wreath that included 4 snowflakes in 4 different colors, sort of like an ombre of blues going into silver. And I'm using UV resin with 4 types of alcohol ink. 3 are different shades of blue, and 1 is a silver metallic that I got in a set. And I will link to all of my supplies, as always, in the description for you. Now, there's a process I have with this, and this is because, again, it is really difficult to get these snowflakes out when they are completely hardened. So what I like to do is put them under the UV light for about a minute to 90 seconds, and then flip them over and hit them with another UV light. But I don't let them completely cool or dry. So when I end up taking these out, it's actually really difficult to do, and it requires pulling very hard while these pieces are extremely hot. And I like to do this when the resin is still somewhat pliable, because the snowflakes can bend ever so slightly without breaking or without tearing the molds. But consequently, like I said, since I have to pull on these so hard, essentially these molds are here for a good time and not a long time. And you can see I'm just kind of doing like an assembly line of this and going through all of the colors. Now, originally, I had bought this wreath frame at the dollar store, and it was one of those things where, let me know if you've done this too, where you buy something without really having a project in mind. It's just more like, I can probably use this someday. And it sits there for months and months, and you never end up using it. That was this wreath. And I thought, I've got this wreath frame, I've got these snowflake molds, let me go for it and make a snowflake wreath. And so putting this all together, I realized that actually this wasn't going to work out. The way the frame is sort of concave makes it really difficult to get any of these snowflakes to attach to it. And so I kind of had to improvise with something else and just put this frame back in for another day. What I ended up using was this set of silicone cake molds, and I used the biggest one, which I think is 12 inches, and one of the smaller ones inside to create a base for this wreath. And I'm going to use a glue gun to maintain the shape and make sure that it is still like a wreath shape and doesn't leak under the insert. Now for resin wreath base, I'm going to be using UV resin again, about 100 milliliters of it, and these super cool snowflake, pieces of, whitish confetti that I got from the dollar store. And to be honest, looking back, I really should have used 2-part resin instead of the UV, because this is an opaque mold and it was just really hard for me to get the UV light down there. But to be totally honest, I wanted to get this project done with because this was the last project I had to do before I could update my crafting space, which is in an upcoming video. And originally I was just going to do clear resin, not really add anything to it, but 1, I remembered I had this stuff and wanted to use it, and 2, I wanted to give it just some kind of, zhuzh, so that it got hit by sunlight and things, it would yellow a little bit, but it wouldn't be as obvious. I feel like the kind of confetti would detract from that. Hopefully, we'll see. And actually 100 milliliters turned out to be the perfect amount for this wreath mold, or my improvised wreath mold. So this is the part where I realized that I had made a bit of a mistake using UV resin in an opaque mold, that despite it being kind of thin and it being a pretty shallow pour, it was still going to be really difficult to get this to dry. So first I decided to try and use just my handheld UV light, but it's just way too much time, and I knew that that wasn't going to work out the way that I needed it to. So then I switched to just setting the UV light over it and kind of trying to dry it in quadrants. Okay, now it's time to see if this worked out according to plan. And unfortunately, it did not. I got some leakage through, but actually that isn't too awful. I just have to flip it over and hit it with the UV light. And I'm just going to clip some of these little straggly pieces off. Now it's time to arrange this, and since this, I guess, wreath base that I created is much smaller than anticipated, I am going to try out a few different variations to see how this works out. And I think this is definitely the part that just feels a bit like jazz, where you just sort of go with it and see what happens. So since I ended up using mostly just the small ornaments, I'm going to end up, I guess, putting these as sun catchers or maybe ornaments on my tree. We'll see. But I'm going to be using one of the bigger ornaments in the middle, especially in one of my favorite colors that created for this, as sort of a dangling part at the end. And I'm going to admit, like, the big star being a bit off center at the top is somewhat a problem for me, but I can adjust that with wire later on. That's not a huge deal. Most important part is that it's finished and it actually turned out pretty well. I hope you like it too. I will see you in the next video.